Mist curled around the jagged cliffs like a living thing, hiding the dark silhouette of Castle Werewolf. Its spires reached into the gray clouds, sharp and cold, and its windows glowed faintly like dim lanterns in a sea of fog. The castle had stood for centuries, a kingdom of shadows and silence, ruled by the bloodline of vampires who prized strength, cunning, and control above all else. But at the heart of this kingdom, there was a prince who knew nothing of the sounds that others took for granted. Prince Kalen had been born deaf. From the moment he drew his first breath, the world was silent to him. He had never heard the rustle of leaves, the cry of birds, or the gentle fall of rain against stone. Even voices, harsh or soft, commanding or kind, were nothing more than moving lips and changing expressions. His parents, the king and queen, had loved him, but they feared his silence. In a world where power was often proved through voice and command, a prince who could not hear was a prince who seemed incomplete. Yet Kalen was no weakling. In the quiet of his rooms, he moved with the grace of a predator, his senses sharper than any ordinary vampire. He could feel vibrations in the floor, the subtle pulse of blood in the air, the whisper of a heartbeat from across the room. His silence made him watchful, patient, and cunning, and it made him lonely. Deep inside, Kalen longed for connection, for someone who could reach him where others could not. But in the royal court, no one dared. The castle was alive with whispers that Kalen could not hear. Lords and ladies spoke behind hands and walls, questioning his worth. "How can a prince lead without hearing?" they murmured. "How can he command if he cannot hear loyalty or betrayal?" But Kalen had learned to see more than they knew, to understand loyalty in gestures, truth in hesitation, and betrayal in the smallest shift of posture. He was silent, yes, but he was not powerless. Outside the castle, in a village nestled against the edge of the cursed forest, lived a woman named Ilara. She was a single mother, her past filled with hardship and loss, but her spirit had never been broken. Her days were spent tending a small garden, caring for her young son, and navigating the challenges of a world that often underestimated her. What made her different, though, was a strange gift. She could sense the emotions of others so vividly that it was as if she heard them with her soul. She understood fear before it showed in the eyes, joy before it escaped in laughter, and grief before it bent the shoulders. Rumors of her reached Castle Werewolf, carried by merchants, travelers, and spies. They said she was special, and in a place where power was everything, anything unusual drew attention. Kalen's advisors whispered that this human woman might serve a purpose. Perhaps she could awaken something in the silent prince, or perhaps she would be a distraction. But she must be brought to the castle. It was under the pretense of a request for her skill in healing that Ilara was summoned. She approached the castle cautiously, her son's hand in hers, the fog curling around her like a warning. The guards eyed her warily, their senses sharp, their instincts tuned to the dangers that often hid in the fog. But Ilara carried no weapon, no threat. She carried only herself and a quiet strength that made even the most cautious hesitate. Inside the castle, Kalen watched her arrive from a high balcony. He could not hear her voice, could not hear the clatter of her steps, yet he felt her presence as clearly as if she had stepped into his chest. There was a rhythm to her, a heartbeat that resonated through the stone floors, and a warmth that seemed impossible in a place built on cold ambition. Their first meeting was awkward. Kalen sat upon a throne in the high hall, his gaze steady and unreadable. Ilara bowed respectfully, trying to mask the awe she felt in the presence of a prince who seemed more myth than man. She could sense his isolation immediately, the weight of centuries pressing down on him, and it stirred something inside her, a desire to reach him, to show him that connection was possible. Kalen extended a hand, not to touch, but to invite. Ilara took it cautiously, her fingers brushing his. In that moment, a spark seemed to pass between them. Kalen felt it as a vibration, a ripple through his chest, something that told him that this woman was different. She could reach him in ways no one else could. Days passed, and Ilara stayed in the castle. She tended to minor injuries of the royal household, guided servants, and managed her son's education, but her attention was often drawn to Kalen. He moved through the halls with silent precision, his eyes always watching, always calculating. He studied her in return, fascinated by the way she laughed, the way she moved, the way she seemed to radiate life in a place that had grown accustomed to shadow. The court, however, was not pleased. Whispered accusations of impropriety spread quickly. Some claimed Kalen was falling under her influence, that his judgment might be compromised. Others feared she might learn the secrets of the castle and use them against them. The tension was palpable, though Kalen felt it only as a subtle shift in the atmosphere, the tightening of shoulders, the sharpness of glances. One evening, when the sky was heavy with storm clouds, Kalen led Ilara to a secluded chamber deep within the castle. The room was lined with old books and strange artifacts, remnants of rituals long forgotten. Candles flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and the air smelled of old parchment and incense. "I want to show you something," Kalen indicated, his gestures deliberate, precise. He moved to a pedestal at the center of the room and uncovered an ancient scroll. His fingers traced the symbols carefully, as if remembering their shape, their weight. Ilara watched, fascinated. She could feel the power in the room, the tension that seemed to hum in the air. Kalen's eyes met hers, and for the first time, she felt the depth of his isolation, the loneliness that had shaped him for decades. He began a ritual, moving his hands with precision, chanting silently in a language long forgotten. Ilara felt the vibrations through the floor, through the walls, and through her own chest. The ritual should have produced nothing. He could not hear the chants, could not respond to the magic properly, but something extraordinary happened. A single, faint note echoed in the room. It was not loud, not fully formed, but it was a sound that only Ilara seemed able to perceive. Her heart skipped. She knew in that instant that the prince's silence was not absolute, that within him, buried beneath centuries of shadow and solitude, was a possibility so improbable it seemed impossible. Kalen's gaze searched hers. He could not hear the note, but he felt the reaction. The sudden widening of her eyes, the quickening of her heartbeat. Something had changed. Something beyond magic, beyond ritual, had awakened between them. The storm outside raged harder, and the wind howled against the castle walls. Lightning flashed, illuminating the room in stark, brilliant white. For a moment, time seemed to pause. Kalen and Ilara stood in silence, connected by something deeper than words. Something that no court intrigue or whispered fear could sever. But the castle was not without its dangers. In the shadows, Kalen's rivals stirred. They watched, always watching, seeking a weakness in the prince's unusual life. They had long dismissed his silence as a flaw, but they would not ignore the human who had entered his life, the one who seemed to reach him in ways no one else could. As the candles flickered and the storm raged, Kalen and Ilara shared a glance that spoke more than any voice could. In that silent exchange, they both understood something undeniable. The bond forming between them was extraordinary, and it could not be ignored. Yet, the night was far from safe. Unseen in the darkness, something ancient stirred in the castle's hidden corners, something that had watched over Kalen's family for centuries. It had fed on fear, thrived on isolation, and now, sensing this strange human connection, it began to move. Its presence was subtle at first, a chill in the air, a shadow out of place, a faint vibration in the stone. But Alara felt it immediately, her instincts sharp, honed by years of survival. She reached for Kalen, her hand brushing his. The vibration of her touch resonated through him, and for the first time he felt something akin to a pulse, not just of magic, but of life itself. And in that moment, he understood that this woman was no ordinary human. She was the key to a world he had never known, the bridge between silence and sound, between shadow and life. The single note lingered in the air, impossibly delicate, impossibly real. Kalen's lips curved in the smallest hint of a smile, almost imperceptible, but genuine. Ilara's eyes shone with a mixture of awe and fear, knowing that whatever had just begun was beyond comprehension, and yet entirely within their reach. Outside, the storm continued to howl, as if echoing the tumult of emotions within the castle walls. And in the hidden corners, the ancient presence stirred, awakening fully to the possibility that the prince's silence might finally be broken, and that the consequences of such a change could ripple through the kingdom, through the centuries, in ways no one could predict. Kalen and Alara stood together, aware of the danger, aware of the impossible connection, aware that the first step of a journey had begun, a journey that would challenge every law, every expectation, every shadow of the past. And as the storm crashed against the cliffs, a single thought echoed in both of their hearts. Something impossible had begun, and nothing would ever be the same. The storm had passed, leaving the cliffs shrouded in mist and silence. Castle Veyrath stood like a shadow against the pale morning sky, its spires sharp, its walls cold, and its halls heavy with secrets. Prince Kalen moved through them with a grace that had always been his alone, but now something was different. He felt the faint echo of life, tiny, subtle, and impossible. He could not hear it as others did, but he could sense it, vibrating through the floors, brushing against the walls, and most of all, through the presence of the human who had come to change everything. Ilara had stayed in the castle after that night of the storm. She wandered its corridors with quiet confidence, her son at her side, careful to avoid the stares and whispers of the court. She felt the walls themselves watching her, the centuries of silence pressing in. Yet she did not falter. Something about Kalen drew her deeper, a silent pull she could not explain. And Kalen, for his part, observed her constantly, fascinated by the way she moved, by the warmth that clung to her despite the cold stones, and by the steady beat of her heart that seemed to resonate with his own. Kalen had spent centuries learning to survive in silence. He had watched his enemies, read gestures, and predicted threats long before anyone spoke. But with Ilara, he could not predict. She was unpredictable, alive in a way that unsettled him and thrilled him all at once. Her presence was like sunlight piercing through a long-forgotten darkness, and though he could not hear her voice, he could feel the rhythm of her emotions, the subtle waves of fear, curiosity, and laughter that pulsed around her. He began to seek her out more often. At first, it was curiosity, an academic study of the human and her extraordinary ability, but soon it became necessity. Without her, the castle felt heavier, the walls closer, and the silence deeper. With her, he sensed possibility, a vibration in the air that suggested life could be more than shadow and duty. Ilara noticed his attention, though she tried to hide her awareness. She had always been cautious, having survived on her wits and instincts for so long. But Kalen was different. He was not like the humans she had known, nor like the creatures she had heard whispered about in fearful tales. There was a depth to him, a stillness beneath the power, a loneliness that mirrored her own. She felt drawn to him, even as she reminded herself that a vampire prince could be dangerous, and that a bond with him could change her life forever. Days passed. and Kaelin attempted to teach her the rituals and knowledge of his world. He used gestures, touch, and written symbols, showing her the delicate balance of magic and power in the castle. Elara, in turn, shared her gift with him. She taught him how to listen in ways beyond sound, how to feel the flow of life in a room, how to sense intentions and emotions, how to interpret the heartbeat of a creature or person nearby. For the first time, Kaelin discovered a way to connect to the world in ways he had never imagined. Yet peace was fleeting. The castle's enemies were patient and cunning. Kaelin's rivals, led by Lord Veyron, a vampire of cunning ambition, had not forgotten their chance to undermine him. They whispered through corridors and corridors of darkness, plotting to exploit any sign of weakness. The prince's silence was still considered a flaw, and now a human woman had entered his life. To some, that was an opportunity. One evening, Kaelin and Elara wandered into the hidden library, a place where sunlight never touched the shelves and where magic seemed to hum faintly in the air. Scrolls and books filled every wall, written in languages long forgotten. Candles flickered as they moved, and the shadows seemed to shift as if alive. Kaelin gestured to a tome, opening it carefully. The pages were filled with symbols and notes that described rituals of perception, ways to expand the senses beyond the ordinary. He could not hear the words, but he could feel the power behind them, the vibrations that emanated from the magic contained within the book. Elara's fingers brushed the pages, and she felt the pulse of magic as if it were a living thing. She looked at Kaelin, her eyes wide with awe. "You could feel this?" she asked, speaking softly, though he could not hear. She touched her hand to his, letting him feel her heart. The vibration of her pulse mixed with the magic in the room, a rhythm that he could sense deep in his chest. It was more than sound. It was life itself. Kaelin studied her carefully. He did not understand the feeling entirely, but it mattered. The connection was real, and it stirred something ancient within him. For the first time, he felt a thread of hope, a possibility that the silence had not fully claimed him. Their lessons continued for weeks. Kaelin learned to interpret subtle movements, to feel emotions, and to anticipate danger with a precision that even he had not thought possible. Elara learned to navigate the shadows of the castle, to survive its hidden traps, and to sense the intricate balance of power that held it together. Together they became a team, a blend of human intuition and vampire instinct, each strengthening the other. But danger was always close. One night, as the moon hung low and silver over the cliffs, a shadow moved through the castle corridors. Lord Veyron had entered the castle, aided by a handful of loyal followers. They had come to test the prince's strength, to see if his bond with the human had weakened his resolve. They struck silently, moving through the shadows with practiced skill. Kaelin felt them immediately, a ripple of tension through the floors, the air, and his own pulse. He moved like a shadow, unseen and untouchable, his eyes scanning every corner. Elara followed closely, sensing the danger before it arrived. Together they moved through the hallways, silent and fluid, their steps in perfect harmony despite the lack of spoken words. The confrontation came in the grand hall, where the candles flickered and shadows danced across the walls. Lord Veyron and his followers emerged, their expressions twisted with contempt. "Prince Kaelin," Veyron sneered, "you hide behind your silence and your human toy, but you are weak. Today the kingdom will see your true weakness." Kaelin did not respond with words. He raised his hand, and the shadows around the hall stirred as if alive. Elara stepped forward, her own heart beating with steady determination. She placed a hand on Kaelin's arm, and together they created a force stronger than either could wield alone. The vibrations of life, the echo of emotions, the rhythm of their shared bond, combined into a shield that protected them from Veyron's attacks. The battle was brief but intense. Kalen's senses, guided by Alara's gift, anticipated every move, countered every strike. He moved with a precision that no one had thought possible, his silence giving him an advantage rather than a weakness. And when he struck, it was not with brute force alone, but with the combined energy of magic, emotion, and life itself. Veyron fell back, stunned and furious. He had underestimated the bond between the prince and the human, and for the first time, he recognized that Kalen's silence was not a flaw. It was a strength, a mystery, and now a power that could not be ignored. After the confrontation, Kalen and Alara retreated to the hidden chambers. The air was thick with the residue of magic, and the quiet was almost deafening. Kalen felt the vibration of her hand in his, the steady beat of life that connected them. "Thank you," he signed, his gestures slow and deliberate. Alara smiled, understanding, though she knew the danger was far from over. In the days that followed, their bond deepened. Kalen began to experience fleeting sensations of sound, not fully formed, but hints and echoes that only Alara could help him interpret. He felt the laughter of his own people, the whispers of the castle walls, and even the faint vibration of the wind outside. Each sensation was like a thread, weaving him closer to a world he had never known, a world filled with life, connection, and emotion. Yet in the shadows, the ancient presence stirred. It had watched Kalen and Alara with curiosity and malice, sensing the extraordinary bond forming between them. The spirit had thrived for centuries on fear and isolation, feeding on the prince's silence. Now, it felt threatened, its power challenged by the connection that had begun to awaken in Kalen. One night, Alara could not sleep. She wandered to the balcony overlooking the cliffs, her son asleep in a nearby chamber. The wind was cool, carrying the scent of the forest and the sea beyond. She felt Kalen behind her, silent and careful, watching her as he often did. She turned, smiling softly. "You are different," she said quietly, though he could not hear. She touched his hand, feeling the strength and restraint in him. "You are not like anyone I have ever met." Kalen's eyes met hers, and in that silent exchange, he felt the truth of her words. She saw him, not as a prince, not as a vampire, not as someone cursed, but as he truly was. And for the first time in centuries, Kalen allowed himself to hope. But the night was not peaceful. A subtle shift in the air told Alara that the ancient presence was stirring. She shivered, sensing a threat that was more than ordinary, more than human, more than even vampire. Kalen moved closer, the vibrations of his presence a comfort against the unknown. They did not speak, but neither needed to. In the silence, in the shared heartbeat, in the unspoken understanding, they prepared for what was coming. Something ancient, something powerful, was awakening in the castle. And it knew that the bond between the deaf prince and the human woman was the key to something far greater than either of them could imagine. Ilara's hand found Kalen's once more, and this time the vibration was stronger, almost musical in its rhythm. Kalen felt it, the impossible sensation of a sound forming, faint but undeniable. His chest lifted and he looked at her, understanding without words that what had begun could not be stopped. Outside, the castle seemed to shiver. Shadows deepened in corners that had not known sunlight for centuries. The spirit stirred, unseen but aware, preparing to test the impossible connection that threatened its dominion over silence. Kalen and Alara stood together, bound by an invisible thread of trust, courage, and awakening. They did not yet know the full extent of the challenge that awaited them, nor the sacrifices that might be demanded. But for the first time, the deaf prince felt a spark of possibility, a fragile, thrilling echo of life that promised change, hope, and a bond that could transcend centuries of shadow. And in the deepest corner of the castle, the ancient presence watched, waiting, and smiled, knowing that the game had only just begun. The castle of Veyrath lay under a deep, cold fog, its spires shrouded in shadow. The walls, usually silent witnesses to centuries of secrets, trembled faintly with a presence older and darker than any living thing. Prince Kalen stood at the highest balcony, staring out at the cliffs where mist met sea. For the first time, he felt the vibrations of the world in ways he could never before imagine. Not fully sound, not fully silence, but something in between. It was subtle, fleeting, yet undeniable, and it pulsed most strongly when Ilara was near. She stood behind him, calm yet alert, her son safely hidden in the chambers below. Ilara had become Kalen's anchor, the bridge between his silence and the impossible world of sound that he had begun to perceive. Together, they had discovered a rhythm that no one in the castle could understand, a combination of trust, emotion, and shared presence that defied the centuries of shadow that had ruled the vampire kingdom. But the peace was fragile. The ancient presence that had watched Kalen's life for centuries now moved openly, testing the boundaries of his awakening. It was not a being of flesh or blood, but a force of fear, isolation, and silence, feeding on loneliness and despair. For centuries, it had held the prince's heart in its grip. Now, confronted by a human woman whose strength rivaled its own, it sought to reclaim its power. The first sign came in the library, a place once safe, now twisting into a maze of shadows. Kalen led Ilara through narrow aisles between towering shelves, the faint echo of magic vibrating through the walls. Books shifted unnaturally, pages rustled though no wind moved, and shadows lengthened, curling like living fingers toward them. Ilara's hand found Kalen's. She could feel his heartbeat, steady yet tense, and she allowed her own rhythm to merge with his. "We can do this," she signed softly, her fingers moving with care. Though he could not hear, he understood every motion, every pulse, every glance. Every gesture carried more meaning than words ever could. The ancient presence manifested fully then, a figure of darkness that seemed to absorb the light around it. Its voice was not a sound, but a force that pressed against their minds, twisting fear and doubt into sharp edges. Kalen felt it, but the fear it intended to sow was mitigated by Ilara's presence, her gift creating a buffer of warmth and certainty. "You cannot defeat me," the presence seemed to say, not in words but in pressure, in cold, in emptiness. "You are alone, weak, and bound to silence." Kalen stepped forward, his cloak swirling around him, the air vibrating with his command over shadows. He did not respond with words, but with power. Shadows rose from the floor, coiling around the dark figure like living chains. Ilara moved beside him, her own pulse flowing into his, her energy mingling with his. Together they created something neither had known before, a bond that was more than magic, more than blood. It was life itself. The spirit lashed out, striking with invisible force. Kalen felt the impact in his chest, in the vibrations of the room, but he did not falter. Ilara touched him, her hands warm against his skin, her presence steadying him. The vibration of her heartbeat, the rhythm of her confidence, flowed into him like water into a dry vessel. Slowly, impossibly, he began to hear, not as others hear, but in a new way that intertwined with feeling and understanding. A faint echo of sound, soft but undeniable, formed in his mind. He could hear her heartbeat, the rustle of her clothing, even the pulse of magic that filled the library. The ancient presence shrieked, not in sound, but in the unbearable pressure of fear. It surged, attempting to break the bond, to reassert its dominion over silence. Kalen felt it clawing at his chest, trying to rip away the sensation of life that Alara had unlocked. But he did not give in. He focused on her, on the rhythm of her being, on the truth that she had awakened in him something no darkness could take away. With a sudden surge, Kalen extended his hand, the shadows responding to his will. They struck the ancient presence, not with violence, but with containment, pushing it back, forcing it into a corner of the library where it could not reach them. It hissed in frustration, its form flickering, but it did not disappear. It would wait, bide its time, and test them again. Kalen turned to Alara, his eyes bright in the candlelight. Though he could not speak, his gaze said everything. She smiled softly, and the vibration of her pulse told him she understood the depth of what had just occurred. They had survived the first true confrontation, and they had discovered something extraordinary. Together, they were stronger than fear, stronger than centuries of shadow. In the following days, Kalen's perception continued to expand. He could sense the castle differently, feel the heartbeat of life in every corner, detect whispers of magic, and even faint echoes of actual sound. Alara guided him through each experience, teaching him to interpret the vibrations as language, as rhythm, as emotion. Together they explored the castle in ways that no other vampire could, finding hidden passages, long-forgotten relics, and ancient knowledge that had lain dormant for centuries. Their bond deepened beyond survival and magic. Kalen learned to understand trust and love in ways he had never thought possible. Alara saw his vulnerability, the loneliness that had shaped him, and she did not recoil. Instead, she offered patience, warmth, and acceptance, teaching him that power did not have to isolate, that silence could be filled with meaning beyond sound. One night, as the full moon rose over the cliffs, Kalen led Alara to a hidden garden. It was a place untouched by time, where moonlight spilled over silver leaves and flowers that glowed faintly in the darkness. The air was alive with subtle vibrations, with magic and life intermingled. Here he could finally feel the symphony of the world that had always been denied to him. He gestured to the garden, then to himself, then to her, conveying words without words. This is life, this is possibility, this is us. Alara understood immediately. She took his hand, and they walked together, their movements in perfect harmony. The vibration of her heartbeat, the rhythm of her pulse, mingled with the magic of the garden and the subtle echoes of the world around them. Kalen closed his eyes, letting the sensations wash over him. For the first time, he experienced the impossible fully. Not sound as humans knew it, not speech, not the noise of life, but the essence of life itself. He could hear it, not with ears, but with his soul, and it was a revelation that filled him with awe and wonder. But the victory was not complete. In the shadows beyond the garden, the ancient presence lurked, its attention fixed on the human and the prince. It had been tested, and it had been contained, but it had not been destroyed. It would return, stronger, cunning, and more determined than ever to reclaim its dominion over silence. Kalen sensed it, a cold pressure against the warmth he had found, a reminder that danger was never far. Yet, he was no longer alone. With Alara, he had discovered a power beyond the ordinary, a bond that combined life, magic, and trust. The spirit could threaten, but it could not break them. Not when they had discovered each other. That night, under the silver moonlight, Kalen and Alara stood together on the cliffs. The wind brushed against their faces, carrying the scent of the sea and the distant forest. For the first time, Kalen could perceive it all, the rhythm of waves, the pulse of leaves, the subtle vibrations of the night. And among all these sensations, the most profound was Alara. the steady, impossible, human presence that had unlocked a world he had never known. He reached for her hand, and she placed hers over his. The rhythm of their heartbeats merged, a duet of life, trust, and awakening. It was a sound beyond sound, a vibration beyond vibration, and it was theirs alone. In that moment, Kaelin understood that the curse of silence had been broken. Not by magic alone, not by ritual, but by connection, by courage, and by love. The castle seemed to exhale as if acknowledging the shift. Shadows no longer clung so heavily, corridors felt less oppressive, and the faint echoes of life filled the halls. The ancient presence had retreated for now, sensing that this bond was beyond its power to sever, yet it lingered. A reminder that the struggle between darkness and connection would never fully end. Kaelin turned to Alara, his gaze steady, conveying a message that words could never capture. Together, they had transcended centuries of fear, silence, and isolation. She smiled, understanding the depth of the journey they had taken, the peril they had faced, and the extraordinary connection they had forged. In the quiet of the night on the cliffs above the sea, they embraced, not out of passion, but out of recognition. Recognition that they had found something impossible, something beyond silence, beyond fear, beyond even magic. They had found each other, and in doing so, they had rewritten the rules of their world. Yet the night was not without warning. In the farthest reaches of the castle, a shadow flickered, a pulse of darkness that suggested the ancient presence had not vanished entirely. It had been challenged, contained, and perhaps even humbled, but it would wait, as all ancient forces do, for the moment to rise again. And Kaelin and Alara, despite the triumph of their bond, understood this truth. The victory over silence was theirs, but the world remained vast, mysterious, and full of dangers yet unseen. They remained on the cliffs long after the moon had passed its peak, watching the fog drift over the cliffs and listening, not with ears, but with hearts, to the rhythm of life. For Kaelin, it was the first time he had ever truly heard the world. And for Alara, it was the first time she had felt the full power of her gift, not just as a tool, but as a bridge to something extraordinary. And in the quiet, both knew that no matter what darkness might rise in the future, no matter what shadows might attempt to divide them, they had discovered a force that could not be silenced. Something impossible had begun, and it would never end.